Hey, everybody, welcome into the podcast. We are back with another special bonus episode. Today, we are returning to a little series that we like to call Top Fives.
Top 5 movies.
I was waiting to see what your reaction would be if you had a nice little jingle that you were going to throw in there.
Bob, I am so excited. We haven't done a top 5 list, I feel like, since season 1 almost.
Yeah, it's been a while,
man. It has been ages.
It really has. So Brad and I were kind of talking about what we would like to do for a top 5. And, you know, this is coming out the week of Babe. So at first we were like maybe top 5 animal movies, but that didn't really work out. And so, you know, we're stretching it here. But here's our topic. It's September now. We're getting into the season of fall, the season of change. The leaves around us are changing. And we were like, you know, maybe we should do a top 5 movies about change. And then that was really vague and nebulous. So we settled on this. We're going to do a top 5 coming of age movies. And I feel like that phrase, the coming of age movie, is something that I read in movie reviews all the time. Critics like to use that phrase, but it's not really something that we've defined very well. So Brad and I looked up a definition, and it said something about a story where somebody goes from childhood to adulthood. But honestly, I don't know if that's a great description, because when I think coming of age, I think about a movie with a young hero or a young protagonist who goes through something and comes out the other side a better person, a more mature person, even if that doesn't mean that they grew up, quote unquote, like physically. You know, they had some sort of growth. And I think that's kind of like the definition we're going with, Brad. At least that's the one I went with.
Yeah, Bob, I think coming of age, it can be nebulous, but I think you've given us a good definition. You know, what does it mean to mature from one stage of life to the next? Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be a child through their teenager years becoming adults. You know, it could just mean that you've come to a new emotional level of healthiness that you didn't have before. You know, now I will say, I think that in order for it to still be in the coming of age genre, you can't have a story about Grandpa Jack, you know, becoming a more emotionally healthy person. I think it should have something to do with a younger person. So probably under the age of 30. I don't know. Is that a fair?
I'd say under 20 for sure. Like,
okay.
You know, Brad, we actually revealed our top 5s to each other a minute ago. I think yours all fall pretty safely into that category. But, you know, I think once you get stories about people who are like out of college and joining the workforce, it's like, all right, I don't really think this is a coming of age movie anymore. You're just an emotionally immature man who learned something along the way.
See, I don't know. I actually think that a movie like 500 Days of Summer could probably be classified as a coming of age story.
Oh, interesting. All right, well, we'll debate that later, but for now, it's time for us to get into our top 5s. And as we talk about these movies today, we are going to be sipping on 4 different whiskeys that all come from the state of Virginia. 3 of them come from a distillery called Silverback Distillery, and the 4th one comes from Catoctin Creek Distillery. And so the first one we're going to try today is the Catoctin Creek Rye. We will give a full review of that in just a moment. But before we get there, Brad, it's time for us to reveal our number 5 pick for our favorite coming-of-age movies.
Bob, for my 5th best coming-of-age movie, I chose the classic movie, The Sandlot.
Interesting. Brad, I want to hear what your reasoning is. Why would you call that a coming-of-age movie?
Well, I think that what you see here is Scotty Smalls moving to a new town. You see him trying to make new friends. And through the shenanigans that they get in together, you see the group as a whole come to a more mature state. They come to a more emotionally healthy place. And you see them move forward as a group. And you see Smalls grow in his self-confidence and his ability to make friends. And his ability to be a whole human being. You know, and so sure, they don't end with them in like college or going off to get a job. But you do get an awesome montage where you find out that, you know, the one kid marries the lifeguard and has 97 kids. So if that's not coming of an age, I don't know what it is.
So what you're saying is you were really scraping the bottom of the barrel here when it came to finding a 5th movie.
I actually don't think that I was, Bob. I think that the majority of Film and Whiskey Nation would stand by me and say that this is a great, great coming of age film.
Brad, I'm just giving you a hard time. I think that's a really solid explanation for why you chose that one. Number 5 was really hard for me because I feel like I had 4 or 5 contenders in here. I was really thinking hard about putting Where the Wild Things Are in here, a movie that I truly loved for how much it shows like the psychological turmoil of young people. I thought about putting George Lucas's American Graffiti in here, but I went kind of in the same vein as you did, Brad, and I chose a kids movie for number 5, and I chose the movie How to Train Your Dragon. I absolutely love this animated movie, and I think that dynamic of father and son, which we see so often come up in movies, is really done to perfection here. This is a movie about, a dad learning to accept who his son is, and it's also a story about a son learning to apply his unique talents in a way that helps him overcome this huge obstacle.
I'm sorry for everything.
Yeah, me too.
You don't have to go up there.
We're Vikings. It's an occupational hazard.
I'm proud to call you my son.
Thanks, Dad.
And by the end of the movie, you have the young boy Hiccup. He ages. He helps rule this little tiny nation that they have. And I think it's a great picture of what a coming of age story looks like. Brad, we've talked about a lot of animated movies before, but I don't know if I've ever talked to you about How to Train Your Dragon. Have you ever seen it before?
Oh, Bob, I love that movie.
I do too, man.
It's so good.
Like, honestly, the whole trilogy is good. But the first one is, honestly, I don't think people talk about it enough. It is an all-timer on my list of, like, my favorite animated films.
Well, I think it's kind of just like Toothless. It's a movie that has flown under the radar for far too long. And Bob, maybe we should use our massive platform to put it in its rightful place.
I think we should do a whole episode on How to Train Your Dragon, Brad. And I'm glad that you're with me. Do you think that it's a good choice for a coming of age film?
Oh, of course it is. Yeah, you get to see Hiccup move from a bumbling, stumbling young kid to being challenged by the circumstances around him, and he grows into, a future chieftain. And it's great. It's great stuff.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. What do you say we ride this wave of positivity into talking about our first whiskey of the day, which is this Catoctin Creek Rye? Now, Catoctin Creek is a brand that I see featured on a lot of our Instagram followers' accounts. It seems like they're really putting out some good stuff for a craft distiller. This is their Roundstone Rye whiskey. They were nice enough to send us each a full-sized 750 milliliter bottle of this. It clocks in at 92 proof. So it's actually non-age stated as well. I'm looking forward to this, Brad. We've had some really good ryes on this show lately, and I'm excited to see if Catoctin Creek can add this Roundstone Rye to that list. What are you picking up on the nose of this one, Brad?
Bob, as I nose this rye, I can't help but notice that this smells young.
Yeah.
It smells just a little bit underdeveloped. It needs a little more time to bring it to a point where it just has a little bit more maturity. It's not the worst nose I've ever smelt, but it's not getting me excited for the rest of the experience.
No, Brad, you're exactly right. This definitely smells young. And we've had some young ryes before that have that really great soft floral character to it. This is not that. This one, the dominant note that I'm getting off the nose is actually moonshine. Like, I don't know if you've ever actually had like real moonshine, Brad, but that's what I'm getting off of this. Like, it has that distinct, not rubbing alcohol, but moonshiny alcohol scent to it. And I don't know if that bodes very well because it does smell a little bit like rye grain, but the dominant note is not the rye. The dominant note is this young, underdeveloped alcohol scent. I do think that I get a few fruit notes on this. I'm getting a little bit of pear, a little bit of peach, which I like, but I'm just worried it's going to be swallowed up by this alcohol. But there's only one way to find out, Brad, so let's give it a sip.
Bob, as I drink this, there is a nice, smooth kind of mouthfeel to it. It's a little bit silky. It goes down smooth. The flavors are a little bit lacking. I feel like I get a little bit of an herbal taste to it, almost like an Angostura bitters. It's not that same flavor, but it's kind of in that vein of herbaliness. I don't know, Bob. What are you getting on the taste?
Well, Brad, I think the first thing we should say here is that Catoctin Creek, they sent us these bottles to try in exchange for a fair and unbiased review. Brad, I'm just not a fan of this. I don't think that I'm really surprised that it's non-age stated, because that means that it's been aged longer than we think it has. But it has the characteristics of something that's only been in the barrel for like a couple months, if that makes sense. Like, it has great color to it. I can tell that the grains are really front and center here, but it just has this underdeveloped, really kind of bitter, sour flavor to it. And it's like overwhelmed by this moonshiny alcohol flavor as well. If you had put this in front of me and asked me how long do I think this has been aged for, I definitely would not have thought that it had been aged as long as it has. This is labeled as a single barrel rye, so it is possible that the barrel that we got just didn't come out very well. But Brad, I'm not a fan of this. Are you?
No, not really. I think that it just kind of tastes a little bit oily. There's a specific note that I can't really put my fingers on, but it doesn't sit well. It doesn't finish well. I feel really bad. Bob, you and I have talked all the time. We want to love our whiskey. You know, we're not here to give crappy reviews of whiskeys. We try to evaluate every whiskey as fairly as possible. And if I'm being as honest and fair as I can, this is a whiskey that needs a little bit of work. I think there's potential here. I think the color is beautiful. I think that they could move a lot of directions with this, but where it's at right now, I just think it could use a little bit of work.
Yeah, for sure. It really seems like they're trying to market themselves as doing things the hard way, right? This is single barrel. It's non-chill filtered. It's 100% rye mash bill. Like, they don't seem to be cutting corners, and I really appreciate that. But this is one of those times where I think that moving away from single barrel and moving into a small batch might be a good idea, because you might be able to blend out some of those impurities that we're getting here. I'm not going to recommend this whiskey. I'm probably going to use the rest of this bottle as a mixer. I think it'll hold up pretty well in a cocktail. But just drinking it neat, I'm not a fan of this one, Brad.
Well, it's a little bit unfortunate, but I think that's exactly kind of what this whole list is about. Coming of age is about growth and improvement and moving forward in your life. And so I think it's time that we get to our number 4 movie, Bob.
Yeah, Brad, for my number 4, I picked the movie that I think might be the best teen movie of this new century, and that is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. This is a movie that I had heard good things about. I went to see it on like a second run theater. It was the Dollar Theater. And I was absolutely blown away. I saw it when I was in college, so it didn't hit me the way it might have when I was in high school. But it has the spirit of one of those John Hughes movies without some of the problematic stuff that we talked about in a movie like The Breakfast Club. I haven't seen a movie that so perfectly captures the angst and the frustrations and the hurts of being a teenager and being, an outsider as much as this movie. It is one of my absolute favorite coming-of-age films, The Perks of Being a Wallflower.
Bob, when you brought up this as a topic, I just knew that you were going to bring this movie up, and I would have nothing to say about it, because I've never seen it. It looks good. I think I would like it, but, I'll get to it eventually.
I will say, Brad, is this movie going on like my 100 best movies of all time list? No, but I would probably recommend watching it sooner than I would recommend a movie that is on my 100. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just such a good, crowd-pleasing movie. I think you should put it at the top of your list for movies to watch when you get a chance.
Well, I'll definitely do that. I think I'll get around to it. It's been on Netflix for a long time. I'm sure it's still there. My number 4 movie, though, is 2002, Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man. Bob, I still adore this movie. I've watched it probably in the last year or two. I know it has issues. I know Tobey Maguire is not great. I know Kirsten Dunst is probably my least favorite part of those movies.
Whoa!
You like Kirsten Dunst in those movies?
I like both of them. I think Tobey Maguire's fantastic in Spider-Man. I would pick Tobey Maguire over any other screen Spider-Man.
I think that him in Spider-Man 1 and 2 is spectacular. The third one, the director just kind of took him down a weird path.
Well, just like The Godfather, the third one doesn't exist.
That's right. Yeah. No, Bob, I'm not sitting here saying that you're wrong. I personally like them. I just feel like I've read from a lot of people online that they think Tobey Maguire was not great for the role because of how old he was and certain parts of his nuances as an actor. I personally am right there with you. I really like Tobey Maguire. I do struggle a little bit with Kirsten Dunst, though. I don't know if she was the best choice for MJ. But in the end, we're here to talk about coming of age, and what better movie to display coming of age than Spider-Man?
Yeah.
I mean, you have probably the single most coming of age talk ever given to a young man when you have Uncle Ben sit Peter Parker down and tell him about what the importance of power is and how to use it and the responsibility that comes along with it.
What do we have to talk about? Why now?
Because we haven't talked at all for so long. Your Aunt May and I don't even know who you are anymore. You shirk your chores. You have all those weird experiments in your room. You start fights at school.
I didn't start that fight. I told you that.
Well, you sure as hell finished.
What was I supposed to do? Run away?
No, you're not supposed to run away. But Pete, look, you're changing. I know. I went through exactly the same thing at your age.
No, not exactly.
Peter, these are the years when a man changes into the man he's going to become the rest of his life. Just be careful who you change into.
Like, you could probably insert that speech into every single other coming-of-age film, and it would fit. You know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely.
So yeah, it's not at the top of my list, but it's not far from the top of my list. Like, I could easily see it being like second or third as well. But beyond Spider-Man, I think it's time we get into our second whiskey that we're going to review today. This one is a Blackback bourbon. It comes out of the Silverback line, and I'm really excited to talk about it. This is a company that sent us 3 different whiskeys.
Yep.
This is their classic, their main staple of their lineup.
Yeah, so Silverback Distillery has been really making waves among people who are like diehard whiskey drinkers because it's a tiny operation out of Pennsylvania and Virginia. They have 2 separate places where they distill, and it's run by this mother-daughter team. The master distiller is Christine Riggleman, and they're making their own stuff. They launched this distillery. They're not using sourced product, and they kind of exploded on the scene because some of their product was just so good that it immediately made people take note. And I felt like one morning I woke up and it was like all over Instagram. So I sent them a message and I said, hey, we'd love to try some of your product. They have one really exclusive one that we got a sample of that we're going to get to a little bit later. But they also sent us 2 other samples. And the first of which is this Blackback straight bourbon whiskey. This is a single barrel bourbon that is aged for at least 2 years. It's clocking in at 86 proof. The particular barrel that we have, Brad, is 3.5 years old. So I feel like it's been in the barrel long enough to get some really good character to it. I'm very excited to try this. Brad, what are you picking up on the nose here?
Bob, this is a nice and sweet whiskey for me. There's a little bit of butterscotch maybe. I feel like I get a little bit of vanilla. It's not overpowering. It's not blowing me away, but it's a nice solid nose.
See, I really like this a lot, Brad. And for me, it's peanut butter all the way. And it's not just like a jar of Jif. It's like the really good natural stuff that you get with the layer of oil on top. And it's peanut butter on toast. Like, for some reason, I'm getting a really yeasty, almost biscuity kind of scent to go along with the peanut butter. I absolutely love this nose, Brad. Like, if we were scoring this out, I'd probably give it an 8.5 or a 9 out of 10. That's how much I'm enjoying this. But hopefully that carries over to the taste, Brad. So let's give it a sip.
Man, Bob, I'm glad you pointed out that peanut butter. I think you're 100% right. This kind of tastes toasty, and not like a toasted oak barrel. Like, it literally tastes kind of like toast. It tastes kind of like peanut butter. It's a little bit dry,
yeah,
which isn't something I normally use to describe whiskey. That's more of like a wine terminology. But this one, it's a little bit dry. It leaves me feeling almost a tiny bit cotton-mouthed. It's an interesting whiskey. Not the favorite thing I've ever had, but it's pretty good.
Yeah, this is very different on the taste than it was on the nose. On their website, they say that this is a butterscotch bomb of a whiskey, and I don't know if I'd call it butterscotch as much as peanut butter. But then when you take a sip, for me, it's like weirdly absent of sweetness. Like, it's not all the way unsweet, but there's a little bit of a briny, kind of salty taste to it. And then I got like a lot of dried fruit, almost like a raisin or a prune, which was completely different than the nose. I do think it has a really good finish. There's some good pepper to it, some good baking spice. I almost got like a hint of, do you ever eat like Whoppers, like malted milk balls? I almost got like a little hint of that. And so For me, this is a really good whiskey, but the only area that I would say that it suffers is in terms of balance. If we're talking like what was on the nose, was on the taste, was on the finish, because I don't think that's the case here at all. I think nose, taste, and finish are three completely separate, but all solid things.
Yeah, Bob, there's not much more for me to say about this. It's a really solid bourbon. For being an 86, a little bit lower proofed, this isn't something that I would call a mixer by any means. It stands on its own. You could drink it neat. You could drink it on the rocks. This is a fascinating whiskey. And if you're in the Virginia or Pennsylvania area, I would highly recommend go check this stuff out.
Absolutely. This retails for $49, but again, it is a single barrel and it is only available in-house. So you have to go there to get it. It's one of their most exclusive whiskeys that they offer. We are super grateful for them sending us this one, and we still have 2 more to go. But Brad, what do you say we get into our number 3 choice for coming of age films?
Bob, my number 3 movie is a Pixar film. We're talking about Brave, the red-haired delight, Scottish, just everything about it is all about coming of age.
I like how you put Scottish in there as a characteristic of coming of age.
I mean,
like, dude, Scotland, they all come of age there.
They have to come of age when they're like 5 years old because of how just insane their weather is. And they had England invading all the time. Man, I'm just telling you, Scotland is the place to come of age.
Okay.
And in Scotland, you have the 100% true story of Merida, and it's just spectacular. Now I guess I'll say this. Spectacular is a really big word. Is the movie perfect? No. I think that there are issues with the movie, but when I was thinking about coming of age movies, and I think about how Merida went from being a reckless rogue of a youth to being responsible and worthy of the crown, I really do think that it's a really great and beautiful coming of age story.
Yeah, Brad. And I think Pixar has a really good track record of coming of age movies as well. I flirted with the idea really quickly of putting Ratatouille in here because that really is about someone learning to kind of become their own person and come out from under the shadow of their parents. But I have no idea how old the rat in Ratatouille is supposed to be, so I didn't know if it would apply here.
Well, and it's also a question of if a rat lives for about 3 or 4 years, then if he's already 2.5, that's he's way beyond middle age.
He's on the back end already. Well, Brad, my number 3 choice is a movie that is near and dear to my heart, and that would be 2007's Juno. I have always really liked this movie. I think the script is fantastic. It's so witty. It won an Oscar. It was such a huge story for a while. Roger Ebert voted it the best movie of the year, and based on his review, I think it really carried that positivity into awards season. It was one of the last times we saw a straight comedy be this beloved. But what I love about the movie is that it does tip into the drama a little bit towards the end. This young woman's decision to carry this baby to term and to give it up for adoption, it brings out some really great dramatic elements. And Ellen Page as Juno, she was nominated for an Oscar. I think she deserved every bit of that nomination.
And also, I think I'm in love with you.
You mean as friends?
No. I mean, for real. Because you're like the coolest person I've ever met. And you don't even have to try,
I try really hard, actually.
You're like naturally smart. You're not like everyone else. You don't stare at my stomach all the time. You look at my face, and every time I see you, the baby starts kicking super hard.
I can't wait to get around to talking about that movie someday on the podcast, Brad, because it is just witty and clever. The performances are pitch perfect from Michael Cera, J.K. Simmons, Allison Janney. The cast is fantastic. Brad, have you ever seen Juno before?
I have seen Juno. I honestly can't tell you when I saw it. I think it might have been during college, but I do remember liking it. I thought it was charming and fun and interesting. It was it was a quirky, unique take on teenagers' life that I hadn't necessarily seen before. I don't remember a ton of it, but from what I remember, you're probably right. This is a really great coming of age film.
All right, Brad, that means that it is time for us to get into our next whiskey. We are going to be sipping on Silverback's Alpha Series Rye. This whiskey is also a single barrel. It clocks in at 110 proof. It's a 4-year rye. Brad, that gets me excited. I love it when rye is 4 years or older. I think we're finding that even though we know that rye matures quicker, there's something about a rye that's in the barrel for 4-6 years that is really, like, if this season of the podcast has taught me one thing, Brad, it's that I am really coming to appreciate a well-aged rye.
Well, I think the issue was that early on, we only had 2-year aged rye. And I remember specifically you talking about how, distillers like rye whiskeys because rye matures more quickly than other grains.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the problem is it might mature more quickly in 2 years, but it does some amazing work from years 2 to 4 and even more work from years 4 to 6. I've had a few 6-year rye whiskeys since then. Oh my gosh, Bob. I think rye has the possibility of being one of the best whiskeys out there. And when I have that in my mind and I go to this Alpha series out of Silverback, Bob, this stuff smells spectacular.
Yeah, man, this I mean, it's rye heavy. Like the only rye that I can think of that really reminds me of this, I had one from New York once called Hudson. The brand is called Hudson, and their rye was like the darkest, most like pumpernickel / rye bread I've ever smelled. But it was like too much. And this one is not that. Like it's really dark rye, and you can kind of tell like there's some maltiness to it as well. But man, it's such a welcome change from like the overly sweet ryes we get sometimes.
I was going to say, on the nose, this is a complex rye.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of fruitiness, a little bit of sweetness that doesn't smell necessarily like vanilla or something you get out of a bourbon. It's almost like a dried fruit that's coming through, that it's dark, it's satisfying to look at. I'm just really impressed with this whiskey so far.
Yeah, Brad, let's give it a sip because I am anxious to try.
Whew. Bob, that stuff is spot on.
Wow, man, this is fantastic. And again,
Yeah.
I think what we said about the nose holds true here. Like it has a really thick mouthfeel, which I really, really like. It's not thin at all. It's almost oily, which I also really like. It coats your tongue really well. Not overly sweet. It's a really spicy rye. It has a little bit of that rye sourness to it as well. But man, it's not sour in a bad way. I don't know what the proper word to use here is, but it's like a really good dark piece of rye bread. And it is like hitting the spot. I would really contrast this with that Resilient rye that we had earlier this season, which was also one of the best ryes we've ever had, but that one leaned sweet. This one leans rye, and it's like a really, really nice study in contrasts, I think.
And all of those notes lead us into a finish that is velvety smooth. I would call it about a medium long finish that just makes me smile. It's just really, really good. I can't describe it in any other way. There's a little bit of charredness to it. You still have that nice, strong rye bread taste in your mouth. This is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, the bitterness on this almost reminds me of an IPA. And like IPA is not my favorite beer, but for some reason on this whiskey with this mash bill, like it is working perfectly. It is just such a great alternative to your regular rye. And I think that Silverback knows that they're onto something here because they actually only sell this in pint-sized bottles because it goes off the shelf so quickly. So this retails, it's a little pricey, Brad. It retails for $35 for a pint. However, I would still buy this for $35 for a pint. This is one of the best ryes we've had on this podcast.
Yeah, Bob, this would probably come out near a 45 out of 50 for me.
Yeah, this is really, truly great. And we still have one more to go. But I have to say, Brad, I think it's going to be hard to top this one. But we also still have 2 movies to share. So, Brad, why don't you hit me with your number 2 pick for best coming-of-age film?
Well, Bob, I've actually decided to break the rules that we set for ourselves.
Of course you did.
I'm picking 2 movies here, Bob.
Okay.
I am choosing 2005 and 2007's Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think Harry Potter is like the prime example of what a coming-of-age movie might look like.
Yeah, I mean, I technically could have just said all 8 movies, but man, as I was thinking about Harry Potter as a character, I think that the movement from about 3/4 of the way through Goblet of the Fire to the end of Order of the Phoenix when Sirius dies, spoiler alert, you see Harry go through just an incredible amount of growth and turmoil and change. You know, when Cedric dies, the way he is just tormented over that loss. And then in the Order of the Phoenix, you see people questioning his sanity, who he is. He fights his way through depression. The movement and character that you see in Harry between those two movies is just spectacular. And so for me, that I couldn't just pick one of those movies to choose as coming of age, so I just picked both of them.
Brad, I think that's really fair. I mean, you really could just pick the entire Harry Potter series if you wanted to, because that's exactly what coming of age is about. And for my number 2, I feel kind of similarly, and I know you're going to get mad at me or you're going to fight me on this a little bit, but the whole reason that I felt like I wanted to redefine what coming of age meant is because I wanted to include E.T. And I know that you were not a huge fan of the movie E.T. I think you only gave it a 6 out of 10 or a 6.5. But I think that even someone like you who didn't care for the movie would not have a problem admitting that I think the coming of age element of the movie is what it's all about. I mean, we talked about how E.T. is a symbol for his parents' divorce, how when E.T. goes away at the end of the film, Elliot is left in a more mature place. He has learned how to find confidence in himself. He is a grown-up in some ways, even though he's still only 12 years old. And I thought it was ridiculous that just because the character is still 12, that we're not calling it a coming-of-age movie. And E.T., for me, I will say again, it's a 10 out of 10. It's a perfect movie. Brad, I honestly think that the reason I didn't pick something like Where the Wild Things Are is because this movie set the template for movies like that for decades to come. I feel like we have an E.T. type movie every few years now. There was a great one that came out a few years ago called A Monster Calls, which was all about this young boy who concocts an imaginary monster friend that kind of helps him overcome the fact that his mother has a terminal illness. E.T. really set the standard for these protagonists who live everyday lives and have to overcome something traumatic psychologically to get through that. And for me, it is just a perfect example of what a coming-of-age movie can be.
Bob, I'll say 2 things about this. First off, E.T. is not a 10 out of 10. It is a distinctly average movie. But the second thing that I will say is that I'm right there with you. It's definitely a coming-of-age movie. Like, in my mind, I don't know if there's a more perfect example of a coming-of-age movie.
Right.
Like, you have this kid who goes through all sorts of stuff, and he makes a friend, and the friend gives him more self-confidence and allows him to engage with the world in a new and more healthy way. So, like, yeah, I'm right there with you, man. It's a coming-of-age movie. It's not a great one, but it is a coming-of-age movie.
You just had to get that in there. You couldn't just agree with me. You had to also say that it's not a very good movie.
Bob, you just need to take what you can get, my friend.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, Brad. Well, we have one more whiskey to try, and it is a doozy here. We have the Christine Riggleman Reserve. This is the highest end whiskey that is released by Silverback. I have seen this bottle all over Instagram, and I'm surprised that I have because it is in such limited supply. But this is the stuff that's kind of making waves in the industry right now. I can't remember if it was Fred Minnick or somebody else, but I remember reading a story about how this really influential whiskey taster had given a presentation at like an international spirits competition, and then they ran up and gave him a bottle of this afterwards. And upon trying it, they were like, yeah, this place needs to be put on the map. Christine Riggleman Reserve costs $125 a bottle, Brad. So we're talking like Pfeiffer Pavitt Reserve from Bardstown levels of cost here. So I'm interested to see what we have in our glass here, Brad. What are you picking up on the nose?
Well, Bob, you've brought up like the golden chalice of all whiskeys for me with Pfeiffer Pavitt. So I am intrigued. I'm excited. And honestly, Bob, I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the nose. It's nice. It's pleasant, but it's not blowing me away.
Yeah, Brad. First of all, I probably built it up way too much with that introduction here, but it has some of the elements that we picked up on that Blackback bourbon. And yet I feel like the Blackback might actually have a better nose than this. There's a bit of that peanut butter. But definitely way more vanilla on this. This has like that classic vanilla nose to it, and definitely more alcohol. This one's 107 proof, and I think you can smell it on the nose here. It's a pretty solid nose, but honestly, I think it might be the lowest ranking nose of the 3 whiskeys we've tried for them today. If I was giving it a score, I'd probably give it around a 7 out of 10 on the nose.
Yeah, Bob, I actually like this a little bit more than the Blackback, but you're right. It has similar notes. You can tell it's a similar mash bill. It's a solid nose. It's pretty good, but I am really intrigued to get into the flavor.
Yeah, Brad, on the taste, I would say that the word that characterizes this for me is oily. It has an oily mouthfeel, which is really, really good. I know that might not sound like a good thing to our listeners, but that means that it's coating your tongue well, that it doesn't feel overly thin. I think this one's spicier than I expected, and it's definitely oak heavy. I'm not getting a lot of that like prune raisin that I got on the Blackback. Again, this one is not overly sweet though, but I think it's a more well-balanced flavor than the Blackback had.
Bob, I'm actually really relieved. When I first took a sip of this, it had a nice pop of peanut butter vanilla flavor that I didn't quite notice on the nose. Mm-hmm. And I think it does come through on the palate. You know, it's a little bit better than the Blackback. I think you can tell that it's aged a little bit longer, and it sits on your palate for a lot longer. Yeah. I think this is an interesting whiskey. I think I like the Alpha series a little bit more than this. It felt a little more unique and interesting. This one just feels like a pretty high-end bourbon, but I don't think I would call it $125 high-end bourbon.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that has to do with the method of production and the limited availability. There was only 199 bottles of this made, Brad. So it's basically like one barrel.
Or barrels?
No, bottles. They used like one barrel, picked it, and made it into this. So like just the fact that we got samples of this, I think is pretty incredible. And I do want to say thank you to both of these distilleries today, to Silverback and to Catoctin Creek. Brad, I think I'm right there with you. This is a really solid whiskey. The finish is great. But if I had to rank the 3, I think that Alpha Series rye would definitely take the cake when it comes to the Silverback lineup that we had. I cannot recommend trying that rye highly enough. If you can get your hands on a sample of the Christine Riggleman, try that as well. But I really don't think you can go wrong when you're sampling things from Silverback Distillery. I would highly, highly recommend you checking them out if you can.
Yeah, this is a spectacular bunch of women making an amazing whiskey. I highly recommend it. Go check them out if you're in Virginia or Pennsylvania.
All right, Brad, that means that it's time for our number 1 picks on coming of age films. And I guess I'll go first. I think I've put you on the spot here twice in a row now. My number 1 movie is a movie that we have coming up here in just a few weeks, Brad, and it is Cameron Crowe's comedy Almost Famous. This movie, I think, if E.T. is like the textbook definition of a coming of age movie, this movie makes me feel the coming of age more than anything else. Cameron Crowe based this on his own life as a really, really young journalist who was lying about his age and went on the road with Led Zeppelin. This movie is so sweet and so funny and so charming, and it just hits you right in all of your heartstrings.
I'm glad you were home.
I'm always home. I'm uncool.
Me too.
You're doing great. You know, the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool. So my advice to you, and I know you think these guys are your friends, if you want to be a true friend to them, be honest and unmerciful.
I cannot wait, Brad, until we get a chance to talk about Almost Famous. I'm not going to say much more because we're going to spend an hour talking about it here in a few weeks. But that's my number 1 pick. If I had to pick a favorite coming of age movie, I think it would be Almost Famous.
Well, Bob, I'm really pumped to get to that movie. I think it's interesting. I was looking at the years of all of our movies, and for the most part, it felt like our movies came from our childhood. Unsurprisingly, you got a lot of 90s, a lot of early 2000s. But for me, my number 1 favorite coming of age movie is actually probably one of my favorite movies of all time. And I'll just preface it by saying this. I recognize that this movie at best is an 8 out of 10, probably is more like a 7 to 7.5 out of 10. I'm okay with that. I've watched it so many times with so many different people. I think it's charming. It's funny. I am talking about 2003's Secondhand Lions. Now, for me, this movie has a lot of nostalgia. My grandma, who is now 95, took me to see this movie, and we got there way too early because there was a misprint in the newspaper. And so at the time, my 80-something-year-old grandma literally walked me around the entire Valley View Cinemark and tried every single door to try and get into this theater because she was so angry that there was a misprint in the theaters.
Oh, man.
And like Bob can tell you, the Valley View Theater is massive.
Yeah, I think it's like 24, 25 screens. Like, it's a huge movie theater.
Yeah, when it came out, I think it was one of the 3 or 4 largest movie theaters in America. Which for Cleveland, Ohio is insane. So this movie holds a lot of weight for me personally. But when I go back and watch it probably about once a year, I'm just reminded of the beauty that coming of age really is. And for me, I don't know if there's a better movie that illustrates coming of age than this film. I mean, you have 2 older men that are, the main character played by Haley Joel Osment, who I love. You have Robert Duvall, Michael Caine playing Haley Joel Osment's great uncles, and they just teach him about how to be a man. And I think the beautiful thing is there's some cliches about, being able to shoot guns and swear and chew tobacco. But in the end, the life lessons that they teach him are ones that I think anyone can value. That it's important to believe in something, that it's important to care for your family, that it's important to love somebody deeply. I mean, the lessons that he learns that help him grow from being a shy, stuttering, 13-year-old to an adult who is confident and knows who he is and is able to challenge his mother, who is emotionally abusive at best. It's just a beautiful film with tons of funny moments. And for me, Bob, it was very clearly this movie and then all others when it came to coming of age.
And I think that's the beautiful thing, Brad. You touched on this too. There's a reason that we specifically said our favorite coming of age movies, not necessarily the best ones, but these are the ones that mean the most to us. And I have a feeling, Brad, that if we open this up to Film and Whiskey Nation, we're going to hear some really, really great experiences that people had with coming of age films. So if you'd like to call in, if you'd like to write in, let us know, what is your favorite coming of age movie? You can find us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Film Whiskey.
Or you can give us a phone call. Let your voice be heard on the Film and Whiskey podcast. You can call us at our phone number, which is 216-800-5923. Once again, 216-800-5923. Or you can leave us a voicemail on our website, which is anchor.fm/filmwhiskey.
Brad, I have so enjoyed breaking down another top 5 list with you. It's been way too long, man.
Yeah, we need to do another one of these much sooner than we have in the past.
Well, let's get it on the schedule, man. But when it comes to the Film and Whiskey podcast, we will be back on Monday with another regularly scheduled episode. So please join us for that. Until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.